That is a question I find so hard to answer, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate because I jump from one thing to the other, and I hyper-focus on this and that and the other. I guess that's what the bipolar is, two opposites. But unlike what some people assume or like what is portrayed in the media, it's not quickly switching to different moods.
Welcome to another wonderful podcast and another, well, I wouldn't say wonderful day because I'm looking at my window now and it's, as always, it's cloudy and I'm in London. Oh, how dreary. But it's a good thing we're going to have a wonderful conversation with Rosie. So I'm looking forward to that. Happy days. Rosie, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, actually. I've been looking forward to it.
I'm really glad, but what I will do, I'll put my hands, Rosie. I know I asked your surname, but I've actually forgotten it already. What is your surname?
Burrows.
And
here's to being honest and having an open conversation, right?
Well,
I get
exactly. I'm neurodivergent and I'm proud of it. I have great skills in one way, but I'm scatty in others, and I'm going to celebrate it. Why not? It adds to the character, right? So Rosie Burrows, we have Rosie Burrows with us today. And as always, I do not have a clue what she does, how she helps people, and her background story. So we're just going to have that conversation. So Rosie, just start us off by saying, how do you help people in your business successfully? And we'll go with the flow.
You know, that is a question I find so hard to answer, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate because I jump from one thing to the other, and I hyper-focus on this and that and the other.
Join the club.
Yeah, right. So it's really hard. Do I have a niche? Maybe. I think the common theme in what I've done over the years is helping people figure out who they are and what they want in life. So that's really broad, but it's kind of a combination of business and life coaching. I'm also an ex-teacher, so I help people with online courses, and I've just tried to design my business so that I can follow my curiosity. I have tried to put myself in a box. It doesn't work, so I'm not going to do it.
Good. And it's nice to hear that someone is actually doing something that works for them rather than working with the box that doesn't work for everybody, because we are all individuals. So, all right. So we've got to the stage where you refuse to be put in the box, but you are adamant you're going to help people, but from a dynamic point of view. So let's find out exactly, just give us an example how you help a potential client. In what way can you do so?
So a client I'm working with at the moment, she has just recently decided to leave her 9-to-5 job, which is so exciting. And so I'm helping her start her business. And part of that, an important part for me, is helping her figure out what she wants life to look like. So I'm interested in working with people, women in particular, who want to use business as a vehicle to live the kind of life they want to. So money, of course, is important, but it's not their number one driver. It's more about freedom and flexibility. So I help people establish businesses. My last client, I helped her design an online course and launch that. It was a really big product because it was establishing a new company, not just a sole trader business. And then I recently closed this down, but in the past I have had a paid online community for women, because being an entrepreneurial business owner can get really lonely. So it was just a safe space to get together, sometimes have an event, sometimes help one another learn things. It's just a place to connect, really.
Yeah, no, I get you. It is a very lonely place. I struggle myself. I'm best working with a team and working with people, and so it can be a very dreary and lonely place. I'm glad you found something that works for you, so you can be able to interact and connect with other people. So let's give us another example of how you help a client. So you've given us 2 examples. I like the power of 3s. So let's go for our third one.
Oh, pressure. What's another way? Often I work with people who they've almost reached a rock bottom point, right?
Uh-huh.
And they're just in this place of there's got to be more to life than this. And they're at rock bottom, but they've got enough fire in them to go, I need to fight for something more. And so I jump in with those sort of people because I've got this feeling I need more, but they just have no idea what they want, but they're miserable. So I jump in and it's like, okay, let's get some clarity. And a huge part of that is helping people understand what's important to them. So values, that sort of thing. That's a big part of what I do.
So actually, you go beyond the business side of it. You start by reverse engineering their lives before 100%. You actually hit their business. So 100%. It's a situation you start with the psyche to find out where their pain points within their life rather than their business. Yes. Their business is irrelevant until you find out exactly the underpinnings of what's going on. Is that correct?
That's right. That is right. Because I think, and that's why I have trouble defining what I do or giving myself a label, because your traditional business coach might not necessarily do that. I mean, there's probably ones out there that do, but I haven't come across them. I just think life is too important to be focused on
the external.
Yes, exactly. And you know, we get one life. It's too precious to be obsessing over something that's not going to bring you joy. I think a lot of us can obsess on or hyper-focus on the money side of it because that's a very real concern. I get it. But if you let that be the driver, is that really bringing you joy? I know money can afford us a certain amount of freedom, but at some point, you don't need more money, and what's left?
For me, money just exacerbates what's within your life. So if you've got pure positive things happening in your life, that it will amplify that. But also, if things aren't right within your life, it will also amplify that. Now, a lot of people don't understand that if they've never generated money before, but trust me, money's not the root of evil at all.
No,
it's what shows within your life what is right or what is wrong. Does that make sense?
It does.
So this is why I like the way you're thinking, because you're thinking, right, it's the mindset that you've got to deal with for you to handle what's to come before your life, be that personal or business, and then handling the situations that come before you, because the business is just riding on top of your life. And so you start from the underpinnings, which is really great, Rosie. I really like that. Oh, I love your mindset.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm wiping away sweat. I live full-time in my van and I'm in Australia and it's currently 38 degrees Celsius.
Oh, God.
And the van is a metal box. It's insulated, but of course I don't have the fans on for a podcast. So excuse me wiping away the sweat. I'm not crying.
It's going to be a tough time for you, trust me. Yeah, I was wondering actually, our listeners, I'm sure that you can't see the podcast. We're here having a video cast basically. And I was actually sitting there thinking, she looks very militant. I better be careful what I say because everything around her, she's wearing this green top and at the background it
Can
looks
you
quite
tell I
militant.
like green?
Yeah, exactly. And she looks, and I thought, you know what, I better behave myself in this podcast, otherwise I'm in trouble. But no, beautiful conversation we're having at the moment. All right, okay, so I love the way this is going. I like the way you're thinking. It's very similar to how I do things with my client. Mindset is the underpinnings of everything before you can be consistent in anything in your life. So I'm trying to wonder, where have you been able to use these skills? How you've obviously got these life skills you've come across, and so you've obviously gone through some kind of pain and anguish for you to understand it comes from the underpinnings of the mindset, and that's why you actually help your clients from that point of view. So let's go back a bit. I mean, what issues do you think you had in your life that has helped you understand from that point of view?
It's interesting you bring this up because a theme I've been exploring a lot lately in conversation with people and on my podcast is, can we reach transformation without first hitting that rock bottom? I haven't got the answer to that yet, but let me take you to a few moments in my life that I think have really given me a lot of insight and helped shape how I show up in the world. So probably the biggest thing that shook my world was in 2013. And just a bit of a content warning, I'm going to talk about death. My dad died in a freak accident. I was 21. My sister's 10 years younger than me, so she was 11 years old. Gone, just like that. And so that very much was a cruel lesson in we don't really have control over how long we live. We've got this false sense of control, and we can put the effort in to have good health, of course, and that matters. But at the end of the day, we don't have control of when we leave. So that was a tough lesson. And then 6 years later, Mum got a terminal brain cancer diagnosis out of the blue.
My.
Yeah, and 6 months later, she died. And so I'm learning the same lesson twice. And I just thought, enough is enough. I had spent time in jobs that I didn't enjoy, but I was doing it because, you know, people say, oh, don't waste your degree, just try it out a bit longer, or this is what being an adult is like. You know, I was a young adult, and people going, no, Rosie, just suck it up, right? This is what it's like. But after losing both parents, I just thought, what am I doing? I need to just follow my heart a little bit and lean into my curiosity. It's a risk, but I think it's riskier staying, you know, with what I'm doing at the moment. And I have been in dark places. You know, my first career as an adult was being a teacher.
Okay.
I knew within about 3 months that it was not for me. But I stayed 2 years. My mental health is the worst it's ever been, you know, with self-harm and suicidal ideation and the works, which weren't necessarily new things to me, but it was at its peak. And out of that actually came a bipolar type 2 diagnosis. So there's that in the mix as well. So Mum dies, and I was in a relationship at the time, and I went, right, I have always wanted to convert a van and travel around Australia. So we bought a van, empty shell, and I said to my partner, I'm going to have it converted in 6 months. Bear in mind, I have no experience building things. Zero. No idea what I'm doing. Well, it took me 4 years. And, you know, I'm no longer with that partner, but that was part of it too. So last year was a really big tipping point for me. Because Mum died, I thought I was going to travel Australia. But then someone got in my ear and said, Rosie, I think you'd be a really good manager. And so what did I do? I went off to university and studied an MBA, when all my life I had sworn I was never going to go back to university. So I'd been taken down another path, again, trying to just prioritizing other people's opinions and beliefs above my own. So I'd finished that degree. I got headhunted into a university position for the second most powerful person there, and I felt very cool and everyone was proud. I hated it. I was miserable. I then did another job at the university. Felt very wonderful. I was course coordinator. And in the end, I just thought, you're wasting your life, Rosie. So I plucked up the courage. I sent my boss an email. I was working from home at the time. And I said, I'd like to talk to you about the future of my job. When would you have some time? And I just hit send before I could talk myself out of it. She replied immediately, let's meet in 10 minutes. And I just went, like, I had no plan. It was a spur of the moment decision. Anyway, we get on Zoom and I just said, look, I need to try something else. This, you know, I've really appreciated and enjoyed my time with you. Enjoy probably was the wrong word, but you know, she was a lovely boss, right? I didn't want to leave it on bad terms.
Of course.
And so I quit. No backup plan. And then I launched my podcast, which is something I'd wanted to do for probably over 5 years, which has been so much fun, I got to say. And then sort of started my online business in a more official capacity. I always had side hustles, I guess you'd say. I've
I get
dabbled
that.
in selling T-shirts and stickers and reselling things on eBay and everything you could possibly think of. But I actually kind of went all in on the business. And then a really big thing. I ended an 8-year relationship because I had this moment of clarity and went, our values no longer align. We are wanting to go in different directions. And just because you've been with someone for such a long period of time doesn't mean you have to stay with them. So I think we were both compromising. And so that relationship ended and I moved full-time into my van. That was September last year. And here I am just over a year later.
And how are you feeling with the big changes that have taken, especially with I shouldn't say the loss of because you haven't lost anything. That was an experience. You gathered the experience. It helped you grow in certain ways. So 8 years is finished. So after 3 months, for instance, how have you grown from that? How are you feeling? How is it going with you at the moment with all that going on?
I feel great. And I've been saying a lot lately. I have never had less possessions because imagine a van. You can't fit an awful lot in here. Never had less possessions. Never had less money. Like I left a really high paying job. Never earned that much money. But I have also never been this happy. It's the first time in my life that I have embraced who I am and followed my heart without being talked out of it. And I feel very content. It's not to say it's easy, but life feels so right at the moment. And it could change. It's a for now thing. This is right for me at this moment in time. Who knows where it will go.
Well, I'm so happy that you've gone in the right direction for you. It's taken some time and actually quicker than most, because there's many a person out there, and I'm sure you've had clients that are still going through turmoil in their 40s, 50s, whatever else. So, and you're still going through your journey. It hasn't stopped. You still got a long way to go, but you're going in the right direction because as you go along, you're happier. And if you're happier, that direction is the right direction, which is great. But let's go back a bit. You said bipolar. You got bipolar. So let's talk about the details of bipolar and how that came along, because you skimmed over basically the situation about bipolar, which is good because now
it's a pretty big thing, right?
And it is a big thing, yeah. So how did that bipolar come about?
It's an interesting one. I think I always knew I was different. I just couldn't really put my finger on how. And I'll give a little bit of a bipolar 101 because I know there's a lot of misinformation. So there's 2 main types, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And I've got 2. And it essentially is a mood, what they call disorder. I'm putting in inverted commas. I don't like that word. Where you have extended periods of depression and extended periods of mania or hypomania. So for bipolar 2, they call it hypomania, which is an elevated mood. But in bipolar 1, it's mania, so it's even more heightened. So there can be a lot of risk-taking behavior, but also you can also be very productive at these times. You're hyper-focused on things and your energy is just, you feel amazing. Like anything is possible. I kind of enjoy being in that state until I don't. It can be very destructive. And after that, there's usually a big crash into depression. And with type 2, the depression, this is a generalization, but the depression is generally more extreme than it is in type 1. And then it's the opposite for type 1. So the mania is far more extreme, and the depression lesser. Yeah. So it's I guess that's what the bipolar is, 2 opposites. But unlike what some people assume, or like what is portrayed in the media, it's not quickly switching to different moods. That's not what it is. It's extended periods. And when I say extended periods, like for me, the depression can last 12 plus months, like extended periods. It's not always that long. It could be weeks, but it's very intense. And then the hypomania for me, I've never had it as long as the depression, but it can be months. And so that diagnosis was interesting, because growing up as a teenager, self-harm was a thing for me. Even as a little girl, death intrigued me. I didn't understand what it was, but I remember in primary school, someone had spoken about how their mum had nearly died, or I think her heart might have stopped and she came back. And I remember going home thinking, oh, I want to know what it's like to die. Not in a I want to kill myself depressed way, but I was so curious, you know. But as I got older, you know, the depression would kick in. Like high school was really tough. And then it continued. And then I started teaching, and it just exacerbated everything. You know, I'm sure people can relate when we're in high pressure situations. Everything is exacerbated. All your struggles and, you know, strengths, weaknesses, everything just is exaggerated. So my mental health was terrible. You know, I was rocking up to school as a teacher, sort of wrapping up where I had cut myself. And kids would go, oh, miss, what happened? And I'd say, oh, I hurt myself. And yeah, okay, I did hurt myself, but I wasn't being honest with them. And I don't want to model that behavior to students. Now, this is going to sound a bit controversial, but self-harm in the short term is very effective. We get that emotional release, and very short term, we feel a bit better. But medium, long term, no, it's not an effective strategy. And I knew I needed help because it wasn't sustainable. And in a way, I've reflected on this a lot because I haven't self-harmed in years. I'm not sure how long it's been. But I think I was so desperate to feel something other than depressed that I was cutting myself. So it seems like a juxtaposition, but I was fighting for life. I so badly wanted to live. And I think it can be difficult for people who haven't been through self-harm to understand that. Self-harm isn't always suicidal. And you know, as I was going through these symptoms, I like to research things. So of course I'm on Google. And the more I read, the more I thought, I think I might have bipolar. I was fairly confident. Went to the doctor. They started me on medication for depression. It sent me into a manic state. Things got worse immediately. I went back to the doctor. I'm like, this isn't working. This is what's happening. He doubled my dose. It got worse. I went back and he said, oh, just keep going. And I remember leaving the doctor's surgery and I called my mum and I was hysterical. It's like, Mum, I can't do this. Like, I just can't do this anymore. I was just beside myself in such a heightened state. And thank you, Mum. She called the doctor's surgery and she must have had a stern word with them, like, my daughter's not coping. And the doctor wrote a prescription for a new medication for me to try. And I know people say it takes weeks to notice a difference. I felt a difference in days. Life-changing. But things still weren't back to normal. So I kept going to the doctor and I was saying, I want to see a psychiatrist. And he was very resistant. Eventually, he gave in. And yeah, the psychiatrist said, I think you're right. I think you do have bipolar type 2. It was a very casual sort of conversation. And yeah, it's a pretty big deal being told you have a disorder.
Of course.
But there was no education, nothing. It was just like, yep, off you go. And so I've had to educate myself. And it can be hard to know, and I'm sure lots of people in the neurodivergent community grapple with this. Am I my diagnosis? What makes up my personality? What makes up me? Now, the complication with bipolar is it's a mood disorder, which that very much comes across. You probably heard that train. Apologies.
No.
No? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Train's tooting its horn. Where was I going with that? Emotions. There you go. The thought was there and it just disappears. Who can relate to that? Whee!
That's okay. But listen, I'd like to go back, because you said about the self-harming side of things. It's not necessarily you're trying to commit suicide, but it's also a control mechanism, a way to no, better still, you explain to me what type of mechanism can it be. So not only can it not be for suicide, which I take it mostly is not from suicide, but it's for another mechanism. So explain to us in layman terms, as best as you can, what is that mechanism for? In what way?
Well, I'll preface this by saying this is my experience, right? But for me, it was very much a mechanism for relief. Just felt like I was in this pressure pot and nothing was, I just couldn't catch a break. And people say to me, Rosie, just take it day by day. I couldn't even think a minute ahead. A day to me was just a lifetime. And the cutting was a way to just be present, and it was a release. For a moment, I'd have this burst of just like feeling alive, as weird as that sounds. There's that moment of, yes, I feel something other than just absolute dread and da-da-da. But then, it's really sore and they can get infected and your clothes touch it. And, it's not fun. But for me, it was very much a relief mechanism and a way to, I think, deal with all the big emotions I was having.
Okay, so let's try and break it down even further from there. So I'm sure you tried different things to relieve the pain and the pressure you were going through. So that was not the only thing. And I'm guessing it just eventually you found something that worked highly effective for you, which was the self-harming. And I'm sure you used other things, such as maybe eating lots of food or doing something else. What other things did you try that didn't work for you before you got to the situation of the self-harming? Because self-harming, I'm sure, doesn't happen overnight. Certain things take place before you settle with self-harming. Or am I incorrect?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about that before. The first time I self-harmed was when I was a teenager, and it's because I heard of someone else doing it, and I was like, oh, and I tried it and I quite liked it. And then there was a long period where I didn't do it. But to speak to other coping mechanisms or things I tried, food has been one for me since I can remember. Like always, my weight is always up and down. Like recently, I lost 40 kilos. Like that's a significant amount of weight.
That is.
And and unfortunately, I replaced the cutting or the self-harm with eating excessive amounts of food, I've realized. But I think moving into the van is a big part of how I have lost the weight, because I'm feeling so much more aligned that I have the energy and the capacity to start working on other areas. But when I was at my darkest, when I was teaching, food was one. I put on a bit of weight, and then I went the opposite way and started dieting, and I lost a lot of weight. And then I started obsessing with exercise. I got into triathlons and just lots and lots of exercise, which people might not realize this, but there's more than one way to self-harm. So disordered eating and all that sort of stuff, that's a form of self-harm.
It is. Yes.
And the exercise did help, and it helped me get out of the house, and I had other people with me to do sports with me, triathlons, which is very much a team sport, but it just wasn't enough. And so the self-harm was something I could do at any time. And I thought, I don't have to do it on my arms. I'll do it on my thighs where no one can see it. And so that's what happened. But, stopping it is very difficult. It's not like it's a feeling that ever goes away. Like sometimes I still have the urge, and
Mm,
perhaps in that way it's a bit like an addiction, because it is addictive. You get this surge
it
of,
is.
I don't know the science behind it, but there's probably a surge of adrenaline and
Well,
endorphins and all sorts.
you're totally right. I mean, that's the way I see it. You've actually taken one addiction to the other, one master to another. It's your coping mechanism. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not saying what you're doing is right and what you're doing is wrong. But what I can see is one addiction to another, which is those coping mechanisms for you to cope with whatever is in your life. And what I'm curious about is, obviously the self-harming started when you was a teen, and you obviously saw it, or you came across it because someone else was doing it, and you thought, okay, let me try this. But what was so difficult within your teens or earlier for you to feel that you needed to do something with the pressure cooker because the pressure was just too much? So what were those multiple processes that was so difficult in your life to want you to actually hit that pressure cooker because it was just getting too intense?
Yeah. Well, when I was 12, I relocated with my family to the UK. And so my high school years were in England, and we lived in a little town called Keynsham, so in southwest England, sort of in between Bath and Bristol. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Bath is beautiful, by the way, listeners. Absolutely stunning.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And so I was in quite, a small, white, conservative town, went to high school, and I was this loud, gangly, dorky, nerdy Australian. I stuck out like a sore thumb. And I'm someone I don't really have a filter, right? Or at that point, I don't think I masked very much. Again, that's something your listeners are going to be very familiar with, masking. And so I was showing up authentically, and these people couldn't cope with that. So I remember in the first week of school, I got called that silly Australian girl. And then it just turned into, they'd steal my shoes and swing them around and run around the courtyard. Or, there was even, this isn't something I've shared actually, but there were even boys who would, I'd be lining up to go into class, and they'd inappropriately touch me. And I remember once I spoke to my form teacher, some girls were being not very nice. They touched my back and thought I wasn't wearing a bra and teased me, and I went to the teacher. Not that it's relevant, but I was wearing a bra. Anyway, the funny, I feel the need to justify that. But the teacher said to me, well, Rosie, you don't really help yourself, do you? You're not helping yourself.
Okay.
So I didn't feel like I had support.
In what way why was she saying that? I mean, why would she say such a thing considering what just happened? From her point of view, what do you know? Or you just didn't know as a child?
I interpreted it as an attack on my self-worth, that who you are as a person isn't helping your case.
Because you're quite open and straightforward and
I'm assuming so. And, in general, I think Australians are quite loud, and it can be quite in your face for different cultures. And, yes, I could have tried to change who I was, but I don't think it's ever okay to dehumanize someone like that. So
I agree.
Yeah. So that's the kind of pressure cooker that I was going through. And I tried to make friends, and there are a couple of people who I'd spend lunchtime with, but they'd turn on you in an instant. So I wouldn't consider them real friends. Like, they're friendly when they want to be, and then next minute you're on your own. So it was a very lonely time. I'm quite an academic person, but that wasn't cool. And I'm thinking of other things. It's interesting, the difference in culture between where I was in the UK and where I went to school in Australia. So over here, it's quite acceptable to wear at school unisex shoes. So they're flat shoes that typically, I guess, are men's shoes, but it was perfectly normal for girls and boys to wear that. In fact, it was the norm. I wore those shoes to high school in England and got absolutely ridiculed. I don't know if it was just this town, but all the girls wore heels, This is a school uniform. They wore their dress shoes, whatever you call them, the black school shoes with a heel.
Mm-hmm.
And I very quickly got the same pair of shoes. So I was sort of, what's the word? Like conforming to what was acceptable over there. I changed my hair, I changed the trousers I wore, the shoes. And so I was trying so hard to fit in, but it wasn't me. And, you know, in class, I used to be the girl who'd put up a hand and engage and contribute to the discussion, but I didn't feel safe to do it anymore. I felt very, very alone. And that is what created this scenario where I, started self-harming again. Not again, sorry, it was first time.
No, I can totally see that, because you spent a lot of your time being you, and then you came over when you was in your teens, right? And it was your teens. So what age were you when you came over?
12, and I turned 13 pretty soon
and
after.
That's a very sensitive time, around about the 11, 12, when you're starting to go into the higher school. So when you've hit that school, that's sensitive as it is already, plus you felt that you had to change the way you looked, plus the way you dressed, and the way you think. So, and you had to deal with that at that really sensitive point in time. So you had to, as you said, mask, which was really, really difficult. And being a girl is particularly different too. It's difficult for a boy, but when you're a girl, there's a lot of things going on. The maturity accelerates, you know, you're far ahead and etc. You have to deal with the immaturity of the boys. So you had to deal with on top of that, because boys can be very immature at the time. So I can totally understand how that pressure cooker started to build quite quickly at a particular sensitive point of your age, when you're hitting 11 to 12, and you was isolated at the same time. So it's not as if you had your peers to go to, because as you said, your peers weren't really your friends, and you was double hit with that, because I'm sure there were times where you felt that you can confide in your friends, and then your friends would turn on you and then tell all your business that was quite personal too. So you had to deal with that at the same time.
That's right. When you said that, like, this is a silly little thing, but it hurt at the time. I remember confiding in, so-called friend, a crush I had on a boy, and she just went and told everybody, and this boy didn't like me back, and all the high school drama. So I felt very alone, and I've never been someone that has the confidence, I guess, to share these things. Like, I didn't share with mum and dad what was going on, and I consider myself to have had quite a good relationship with them. But I was scared to do it, because I felt like it meant I was less than, that I wasn't good enough, that I was being a letdown. So I just kept it all inside.
So hence you got to the stage of the pressure cooker being too much, and you had to find a mechanism, because there wasn't the support from your peers, and there wasn't the support from your parents, not because your parents were letting you down, because you didn't feel like you could burden them. All right. So there was and you was in another country, so it's not as if you had old friends from way back in the days, or you had auntie or uncle or whatever else. So the isolation actually was quite intense compared to the average person that always lived in that country, because you had nobody to feed from, to confide in, and whatever else. So I totally understand that was a really, really difficult time for you. So this is why I wanted to just get down to exactly where this self-harming comes from, because something had to give, especially when you can't express yourself. So you got to your teens, the self-harming came. Okay, you moved on, you've got older now, and then you've got to the stage where the bipolar has been, you suspected you got bipolar. You've gone through so many things in your life. Obviously that bipolar's come along because you've always had to hide yourself from teen through to young adulthood, because of the university situation, The situation with your partner is changing. You had to hide there. So I suppose it was a situation you couldn't be yourself. So in every walk in life, you couldn't be yourself. So that happened for a very, very long time. So hence the bipolar came along. You also felt at the same time, you couldn't be yourself with the doctor, because as much as you were speaking to the doctor and you're saying, hey, something's not right, something's not right, something's not right. And he wasn't listening too. So that was the same thing that was going on. So you had to fight your way for so many years consistently without having really the support that was needed. Now, can I ask you, you had an 8-year relationship with your boyfriend. Did you, in general, girlfriend, okay. Girlfriend, did you ever feel, I know you would have confided in her in certain things, but in general, did you confide in her with what happened in the past and during your relationship, or was you still in a state of flux because of what had happened to you in your teens when you confiding with people and you couldn't trust them? How did that go along?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of confided in her. Like, we met when I was in my first year of teaching. I was in a really bad way. That's when we met. Like, you know, it was just, things were at an all-time crazy town. And I had started self-harming again. And it's visible. So I had to have that conversation with her. And her reaction was laughter. Now,
really?
In her defense, I think it was nervous laughter.
Shock.
Yeah. But it makes it hard when you get a reaction like that. And she sort of said, oh, yeah, I've done that before too. You know, is it just because you feel like it? That was what she said. And it's hard. So I was sort of open with some of it. She did know my history, but even in being together that long, I didn't share a lot of what I was feeling. Like, even, like, I'm still medicated today. I have been medicated since diagnosis, which is a whole other thing that I do struggle with, because, and again, this is just my personal experience, it feels like I'm so broken I can't even function without, you know, a pill or pills to make me function. And I fluxed between that and then just being so grateful that I have this medication that allows me to function in a better way. But yeah, it's a struggle. I think I shared bits, but it was really hard. And I'd had a really powerful podcast episode last year talking with someone who was diagnosed with major depression at 12 years old. And we had a conversation about, well, how would we suggest that a person who has a friend or a loved one who is self-harming, how would we suggest they support them? What do they say? I don't know. I think the biggest thing I have to say is just listen. I just want to be heard. Give them a hug. Don't say, what do you do that for? Oh my God, don't do that. You know,
don't
that's
judge.
Judgment.
Yeah,
right.
Never judge.
Because, yeah, and that person is already feeling so much shame and pain and all the other feelings. The fact that they have confided in you is huge. Huge. That's the only real advice I have. And just don't be afraid to bring it up. Don't make it a dirty little secret.
Yeah, listeners, I want to say something, and I try to strive to do this myself, and even in this conversation. The thing is when you speak to anyone, even when you speak to yourself, don't judge, just listen. Because remember, you don't know what they've had to go through to get to that point. It's very easy for us to take things out of context and then make a judgment. But if you don't know how that person has felt, what they've gone through, who are we to judge them? So this is why it's very important to just listen. And this is why I have this conversation with people. I'm a very curious person, and I'm very curious how people tick and how we can improve each other. And that can only happen through a point of conversation without being judgmental. And I think that's very powerful with what Rosie have just said. And this is why, Rosie, I've stopped just your conversations as quickly, because I think it's a very powerful point. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, because I want to show that everybody can be successful, and you have your up days and your down days, regardless of how successful you are. You're still going through your journey, but just remember, don't judge yourself and don't judge others. Remember, we're still going through the path and the stages we need to be successful in a personal or business point of view. Rosie, let's carry on with the conversation. Sorry to stop you there.
No, I think that's important. It's important to say.
Yeah, no. So the reason why I asked you about whether you opened up to your girlfriend is because I suspected that you didn't, because of the underlying issues you had in your teenage, that pressure pot when you shared yourself with other people, and then obviously you lost the trust. You couldn't trust anyone, and that's very hard to get back, even with an 8-year-old relationship, depending how that relationship evolved and came about. And that's why I was curious, and this is why I needed to ask you that. So moving on from that, how were you getting on with dealing with trusting other people, considering that trust had been gone? How is that coming along? Because I'm sure you're still trying to evolve, which is not easy. Yeah.
It's not, and it's a constant thing. And I think a huge part of it was starting my podcast. I'm having such open and vulnerable conversations with people. They're just sharing deep, very personal things. And it's just recently that I've chosen to come on other people's podcasts. I was so excited when you messaged me, because it's helping me find my voice and share my story. It is healing for me. And even the questions you're asking are making me go, just reflecting on things and thinking about it from a different point of view. And so I think all the conversations I've been having with people on the podcast has really helped me open up about it. For some reason, I feel safer sharing with strangers my experience than those that are closer to me. But it's something I'm working on, because I think the people I choose to have in my life, they should be people that I want to share these things with, that I trust them with. And if I don't want to, then why have I got them in my life?
No, I totally hear you. And I totally understand why you did the podcast. It is a healing process, because it was the same for me. I've had my journey, and I thought there's a few reasons why I did the podcast. And the podcast is to help other people not take so long to do what they need to do in their life, because it took me a long time to accept who I was, and blah blah blah. That's a conversation to have on someone else's podcast. But also, I wanted to be in a situation where not only was I helping the listeners, the community, but I wanted to help the actual guests, because we've all got a past, we've all got something to talk about. So not only can the guest help the people as such as the community, but by having the conversation, the guest also goes through a healing process. So I wanted to help as many people as possible. And by doing that, a podcast is great for reaching out, and being a speaker is great for reaching out. So I'm glad you're going through the stage of having your own podcast, because, as you know, just like I do, it helps the healing process with not just yourself, but you're helping others talk about their experience at the same time. And it's a self-healing for you too, because you feel great, right? That you've helped somebody move forward and take another step. They may not take 5 steps at a time, but 1 step is better than no step, right? So, I'm really glad you've come in here just to help with other people from that point of view. So you are healing because you did the podcast. You're glad you've done the podcast. And I take it, how long have you been doing the podcast now?
Not a huge amount of time, 18 months, I think. And I hit the 50 episode mark a few weeks ago. And I just have to say, it's, as someone who has so many interests, I struggle to stick at things. And this is something that I have stuck at.
Yeah.
And that's a big sign to me that, hey, you're going in the right direction.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
So
it's been life-changing, quite honestly.
Well, I'm glad. So you're helping so many other people now in more ways than one. Number one is you're helping within your business because you've had to suffer yourself. You understand about the mind and how the mind can play with you before you even go there with traveling the world or doing your business or whatever your goal is. But you understand that underpinnings has to be dealt with first before you can handle whatever your goal is. So you're helping people with that way. You're doing it with the podcast. So you're taking your experience not from the university of whatever, but from the university of life, which for me is far more powerful than someone comes to me. I've got a coaching, certificate.
Absolutely.
I've got this certificate, okay, right. So they've got a piece of paper showing them a framework and they're going to apply it, the same framework, to every single person who is very different to every other person. That to me does not make sense. I think the skill in helping people is actually listening to their specific issues, their unique issues, and then actually getting something to help them with that's particular to them. Just like when we have a conversation on the podcast and I said to you, Rosie, I don't have a clue, where you're coming from, what you're doing. We just have a conversation. Now, The reason why I can have a conversation with anybody is because I don't have the same 5 questions, which won't apply to everybody I have on the podcast. So if you notice, so listeners, how I actually engage with people to come on the podcast is this way. I literally put out a message that is standard, that's specifically made with exactly the kind of things I need to come on the podcast. So they've got to have certain traits. They must be willing to share their story and A, B, and C. And that message will have people say, no, I'm not interested because it's quite a sensitive subject that I talk about. And other people will say yes. All right. So I get the right people that come on, but they're still individuals. Those 5 questions still are not going to help. And so you're always going to have issues with the podcast because I have a natural conversation as you would with anyone in a room, the podcast always goes well because I've listened specifically to what they're saying. I've then reacted specifically to what they said. And then we have that beautiful conversation. And that is the same thing in life. All I do is apply what I do in life. I have that conversation, and it's really important not to judge at the same time. I'm not perfect. I'm sure I do now and again, but my main mantra is do not judge, sit on the fence and have that conversation. And Rosie, it seems like you do the same thing because you've gone through a lot of pain in your life. You've had to do a lot of turns in your life when people have seemed to have pushed you in a certain direction, which effectively you've pushed yourself because you've just gone with the flow. But then you've put your hand up and said, I take accountability for this. What am I doing?
Yeah.
And then that's when the changes always make. Do you agree that when you make the changes, it's when you take accountability for your situation?
Absolutely. You're never going to make a change until you take accountability and take responsibility for where you are. I could blame everybody under the sun, the people who bullied me, genes, whatever. I could do a lot of blaming, but until I was ready to go, oh, Rosie, you've got yourself in this position. It's time to get out. There's a lot outside of our control, but there's a lot in our control too.
No, definitely. No two ways about it. So in your business, you now take all these experiences, be them positive and negative, and now you decided to, right, okay, I'm going to go ahead and help people in your business. So how do you help people in your business from the point of view? Do you help them from a one-to-one point of view, in a group? Do you do corporate also? How does that run within your business?
Such a good question. When I started, I thought, right, I'd heard all these people on YouTube, all the gurus, you got to do an online course, you got to do group coaching and scale, and you're going to make millions. And I thought, yeah, that sounds great. Very quickly realized that didn't align. And so I do one-on-one work. And could I make more money if I did it in a group setting? Yeah. Could I make more money if I did an evergreen course where it's just a cookie cutter approach? Yeah. But I find I have so much more impact and so much more joy when I work with people one-on-one. Everybody is so different, and I enjoy the in-depth conversations we have and the time that we have. We don't have to rush. So definitely one-on-one.
That sounds beautiful. So when you have these one-on-one conversations, what's the feedback you get when you're, I shouldn't say intense, because it sounds like you're sitting down there with the light on their face and you're having that conversation, but you know what I mean? You have that beautiful conversation. What's the feedback when you have that one-on-one conversation? And what I'm going to carry on saying is, you're not having a one-on-one conversation about their business, but then I'm sure you surprise them when you go deeper and you start elsewhere, because remember, you reverse engineer their issue. So when you do that, that surprises them, because most people don't do that. So what is the feedback you get from that?
People just look at me like I'm crazy when I start talking about what they want their rich life to look like, and not rich in terms of money. They look at me and going, oh, have I just wasted all this money? But then, we get through the first session and they just look like a stunned fish. They've never actually allowed themselves to dream or articulate what they want life to look like, because we just get swept up in the current, or rat race as some people call it. We're just doing what we've been conditioned to do. Like, we get the degree, we get the amazing job, we climb the corporate ladder, we get married, we have kids, we get the house, you're ticking all the boxes. But how often do we actually stop and take stock of our life? Go, is this what I want? Am I showing up as the kind of person I want to be? So the feedback in the first 5 minutes is, what on earth? Or people are very polite and go, oh yeah. Then I keep probing, and it's just like the penny drops. And, we have very deep philosophical conversations. And I think everyone I have worked with seems to experience a lot of personal growth. So whilst they come to me wanting to work on their business, which I do help them with, by the way, and coming up with sales goals, whatever, but that's to me is like the tiniest part of it. It's important, but it's not my focus. And I think it puts things in perspective for people and makes them, we were talking about accountability before, it makes them accountable for how they're showing up in the world. Not going, oh, I'm so busy, I can't make time to see my kids, my work's so busy. It's like, well, who's choosing to stay in that job? Who's choosing to say yes to all the after hours meetings? And I'm oversimplifying this. There's a lot of nuances, right? But at the end of the day, we are making a decision. We always have a choice. The choices might not be exactly what we want, but we have a choice. So if you're miserable, but not doing anything about it, you're making a choice to not make a change. So when people come to me, they've made a choice, they want to change. And that to me is so exciting. I love catching people in that moment before they get overwhelmed and go, oh, I can't do it. You just got to scoop people up just as they've got enough motivation and spark and go, okay, let's go. I feel like I had someone tell me that I'm like the biggest cheerleader, because I get so excited when people have a dream. I'm like, yeah, let's go. I'm not someone to say, that's a bit unrealistic. I'm like, yeah, keep going. Tell me more.
Yeah, I can imagine the smile on their face afterwards, because not only do they have someone that can advise them on their business, which is what they're expecting, but they've also got buy one, get one free. So their personal life and themselves, which then obviously they have something to think about when they go away. And you've not only improved their business, but also their relationship with their partner or their children, etc. Because it ricochets, because you're dealing with the core of the issue, right? So it's ricocheting through their life. So not only have you given them value for their business, but you've also given them even more value when it comes to the core of them as a person, which then makes them think about, okay, what am I doing in my life? And that's a powerful thing, because most business advisors just don't do that. They just look at the raw edges of how to run a business and on paper and etc. And I believe you're totally right, and that's what I do with my clients. I try and find where their mindset is first of all. I break that down, find out what's wrong with the mindset before you even start dealing with businesses or anything else, because the core is what affects everything else.
Yeah. A business doesn't exist in isolation. And if you think about it, how much time we put into our work, like how separate is work from life? And should it be separate? So how can you make work, how can you design it in a way that adds to your life? Not, I got to go to work again. Okay, we're not going to enjoy work every day, but how can we make it an additive thing that adds to the joy in life? Not sucks the joy out of it. Like, let's use it to our advantage.
I see it. Unfortunately, Rosie, I'm going to have to put a line in the sand. I really don't want to, because I could speak to you for a very long time, but I have promised myself not to make these podcasts too long. So I'm going to ask you, what could you advise the listeners in something you think you could leave them, which is quite precious?
I got to make this brief, but number one thing I recommend to everybody is get clear on what's important to you. And the first step in that is identifying your core values. I'm so passionate about this. Eli, I will give you a link for a free kind of mini course people can do, because when I went through this process, I found it life-changing. It helps bring a lot of clarity. So that is the first step. Get clear on what is important to you.
And that's well said. And your podcast, what is the name of your podcast so they can follow you?
Yeah, it's called The Pursuit of Freedom, which is what I feel like I'm doing every day.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds wonderful. All right. And with that says, Rosie, thank you for being on it. I've had a wonderful conversation. I knew it was going to be great. Now, I'm going to be honest, listeners. What happened was I was very late for this podcast. I think by about 7 minutes or so. I've got a problem with the leg and the back. So I eventually rolled out of bed in a huge amount of pain. She was kind enough to wait for me. And I do not let anything stop me regardless. But at the same time, Rosie doesn't let anything stop us. And by doing that, we've had the most wonderful conversation that's been recorded. And I, for one, on this day, will be sitting back, having a nice, beautiful drink with my breakfast, thinking about the conversation I've had with Rosie. And that's all because I never let life slow me down. No matter what's wrong, no matter what's happening, I go, nope, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Come rain or shine. And Rosie, I'm sure you do the same thing.
Yeah, you got to choose to live, right? Yeah.
I'm telling you. And Rosie, thank you for being patient. I really appreciate it. And I am blessed, and we are blessed to have you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
It's our pleasure. In the meantime, listeners, until next time, sayonara.